The day Richard died, the world didn't stop. The Texas sun beat down on the black cars lined up outside the church, just like any other Tuesday. The world kept spinning, but the silence that followed him home, the silence that filled our big Victorian house in Austin, was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the peace of a life well lived and a soul at rest. It was the silence of a vacuum. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than any grief, that something was about to rush in and fill it. My husband had been dead for 24 hours, and my son was already picking the bones of our life clean. I sat in Richard's old leather armchair, the one that still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco and Old Spice, and I watched them. My son David and his wife Chloe. David, with his tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, was pacing by the bay window, his phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't speaking in the hushed, respectful tones of a grieving son. His voice was sharp, clipped, full of words like leverage and market timing and aggressive offer. He was a real estate developer, a shark who swam in the glittering, treacherous waters of Austin's property boom. He saw our home not as a place of memory, but as a multi-million-dollar asset waiting to be liquidated. And then there was Chloe. Oh, Chloe. She was gliding through my living room like a ghost in expensive athleisure wear. Her phone was in her hand, of course. It was an extension of her arm, her brain, her very soul. She'd stop, tilt her head, and rearrange a vase of funeral lilies. Then she'd step back, phone held high, and capture the perfect, artfully melancholic shot. She was an influencer. That's what they call it. Her entire life was a curated feed of feigned perfection, and my husband's death was just new content. I heard the soft click-click of her phone. I watched as she typed, her thumbs a blur. A moment later, I imagined the caption appearing on screens all over the world. Hashtag family legacy, hashtag quiet, reflection, honoring dad. She even staged a photo of herself, one hand resting gently on the frame of a wedding picture of me and Richard, her face a mask of thoughtful sorrow. It was a masterpiece of calculated grief, a performance for an audience of strangers. She turned to David, her voice a stage whisper that carried perfectly across the silent room. "Babe, do you think we should move the portrait of your great-grandfather? The light is just so much better over here. It would really make the mahogany pop for the legacy post." David didn't even look up from his phone. "Whatever you think, honey. Just make it quick. The appraiser is coming tomorrow at 10. The word hung in the air. Appraiser. It was a cold, hard stone dropped into the quiet pool of my shock. Not, "we were thinking," not, "if you're okay with it, Mom." Just a statement of fact. The appraiser is coming. And the gears were already turning. The ink on Richard's death certificate was barely dry, and they were already carving up his life. Our life, for sale. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, in Richard's chair, and let the cold watchfulness settle over me. For 50 years, I had been the quiet partner in this marriage. Richard was the booming voice, the big personality, the one who made all the decisions. My role was to smooth the edges, to keep the peace, to manage the quiet, unseen machinery of our home. I had learned to observe, to listen to the words not being said, to see the storm clouds gathering long before the first drop of rain. And I saw them now. This performance by Chloe, this cold efficiency from David. This wasn't mourning. This was a prelude. This was the opening act of a carefully planned siege. They weren't here to comfort me. They were here to claim their inheritance, and I was just an obstacle sitting in the middle of it. The next evening, they summoned me to the dining room. Summoned, that's the only word for it. It was the room we used for Christmas and Thanksgiving, the room where generations of our family had laughed and argued and celebrated. Tonight, it felt like a boardroom. David and Chloe sat on one side of the long mahogany table, their postures straight, their faces set with a kind of practiced, solemn sympathy. They'd placed me at the head of the table, in Richard's chair, a king being deposed from his own throne. In the center of the table, gleaming under the chandelier, was a glossy, tri-fold brochure. The picture on the front was of a manicured lawn, a sterile-looking modern building, and smiling, silver-haired people playing bocce ball. The name was printed in a gentle, curving font. Willow Creek Senior Living, a new chapter in golden years. David slid it across the polished wood towards me. "Mom," he began, his voice oozing a sincerity that was so fake it was almost impressive. "We need to talk about the future, about what's best for you." Chloe chimed in, placing her hand over his. A perfect portrait of a supportive couple. "We've been so worried, Elizabeth. This house, it's so big. All the upkeep, the stairs. It's a burden. We want you to be safe, to be comfortable." I stared at the brochure. The people in the photos looked less like they were living a new chapter and more like they were waiting patiently for the final page to be turned. They all had the same serene, vacant smiles. "A burden," I repeated, my voice quiet. The word felt strange in my mouth. This house wasn't a burden. It was my life's work. Every scuff on the hardwood floors, every faded patch on the wallpaper, every nail I'd hammered into the walls to hang a picture of my son, and later, my granddaughter. It was a map of my 75 years. "It's an enormous asset, Mom," David cut in, leaning forward. He was in his element now, talking numbers. "The market in this neighborhood is white hot. We're talking unprecedented valuations. By selling, we can unlock your equity, a significant amount of capital. It would set you up for life. No more worrying about property taxes or a leaky roof. At Willow Creek, everything is taken care of. They have a 24-hour nursing staff, gourmet meals, organized activities. They have a water aerobics class on Tuesdays," Chloe added brightly, as if this was the detail that would sell me on packing up my entire existence. "And a book club. You'd make so many new friends." I looked from my son's eager, predatory face to my daughter-in-law's vapid, smiling one. They had it all figured out. My life, neatly packaged and put away in a high-end facility so they could get their hands on the real prize. The house, the money, the legacy that Chloe was so keen to hashtag. My silence seemed to unnerve them. I wasn't crying. I wasn't arguing. I was just looking at them, really looking at them. And I think for the first time, they saw something in my eyes that wasn't the pliable, agreeable mother they had always known. Chloe fidgeted, her smile tightening. "It's really the most logical solution, Elizabeth. We just want you to have a worry-free retirement. You deserve it." I ran my hand along the edge of the heavy table, the wood cool and solid beneath my fingers. 100 years of history in this wood. My history, Richard's history, his parents' history. I finally picked up the brochure. The paper was slick and impersonal. I opened it. Inside, there were floor plans for suites. Small, sterile boxes. A picture of a communal dining hall that looked like a hotel cafeteria. Then, David delivered the final blow. He tried to make it sound casual, an afterthought. But it was the kill shot. He'd been holding it in reserve. "The good news is, we're already ahead of the game," he said with a confident smile. "My firm had an appraiser in the area yesterday morning, so I had him swing by and do a full valuation. Saved us some time. The numbers are even better than I thought. 2.2 million. At least." Time seemed to slow down. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of traffic, it all faded away. The only thing I could hear was the blood roaring in my ears. An appraiser. Yesterday morning, while I was at the funeral home picking out an urn for my husband, my son had a stranger walking through my home, putting a price tag on my life. Chloe, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, added the final nail in the coffin. She reached into her ridiculously expensive purse and pulled out a sheaf of papers, placing them next to the brochure. David even had his assistant draft a preliminary listing agreement. It's all standard. "Once we have it signed, we can get the house on the market by the end of the week. With the way things are moving, you could be settled into Willow Creek before the holidays." They hadn't come to ask. They had come to inform me. It was a declaration of war. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for 50 years, cracked open. The quiet compliance, the habit of keeping the peace, the long-suffering patience of a wife and mother from a different generation. It shattered. It didn't come out as a shout or a scream. It was a cold, quiet fury that settled deep in my bones. I looked at the two of them, my son and his wife, and I didn't see family. I saw strangers, thieves who wore familiar faces. I slowly, deliberately, folded the glossy brochure for Willow Creek in half, and then in half again, the sharp creases destroying the image of the smiling, happy seniors. I pushed it back across the table, along with the listing agreement. My voice, when I finally spoke, was steady, devoid of the emotion they expected. "The meeting is over," I said. "You can see yourselves out." For a second, they just stared at me, mouths slightly agape. This was not in their script. They had expected tears, arguments, pleading. They had a rebuttal for all of it. They had no rebuttal for this cold, final dismissal. David recovered first, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Mom, let's be reasonable," I said, I repeated, my gaze unwavering. "You can see yourselves out. Now." I stood up, pushing my chair back. The sound of it scraping against the floor was unnaturally loud in the silent room. I walked out, leaving them there amidst the ruins of their perfectly planned ambush, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt the ground beneath my feet feel solid again. The shock was already hardening into something else, something much more dangerous. Rage. I didn't retreat to my bedroom to cry. I retreated to my war room. The house, which hours ago had felt like a mausoleum, now felt like a fortress, my fortress, and it was under siege. I walked through the quiet halls, my hand trailing along the floral wallpaper. I wasn't just walking through a house, I was pacing the ramparts, surveying my defenses. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was almost clarifying. There were no more illusions. I knew exactly where I stood. I was alone, and I was being hunted by my own child. The helplessness I'd felt in that dining room began to burn away, replaced by a slow-burning anger that felt like a furnace being reignited after decades of being cold. I hadn't felt this kind of fire in me since I was a young woman, before marriage, before motherhood, before I learned to smooth my own edges down to fit into the life Richard had built for me. It felt good. It felt like waking up. There was only one person in the world I could trust. One person who saw David and Chloe for exactly what they were. I went into my small sewing room, closed the door, and took out my tablet. My fingers, trembling slightly with adrenaline, tapped on the screen until a familiar face popped up. My granddaughter, Mia. She was in her dorm room at UT Austin, surrounded by textbooks and lines of code on a monitor behind her. Her hair was a messy bun, she wore an old band t-shirt, and she had the same sharp, intelligent eyes as my mother. At 19, Mia had none of her parents' polished veneer. She was cynical, brilliant, and saw through everyone's nonsense, especially her parents. "Grandma?" she said, her brow furrowing in concern. "Are you okay? You look different." "I'm fine, dear," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Better than fine. I need to ask you something." "Shoot." "Your parents were just here. They want me to sell the house and move into a place called Willow Creek." Mia let out a short, harsh laugh. It was a sound of pure disgust. "Of course they do. Willow Creek. Dad gets a kickback from them for every resident he refers from his high-net-worth client list. He calls it synergy. I call it vulturing." She leaned closer to her camera. "Grandma, don't sign anything. Please. They're rushing this for a reason." "I know," I said. "Mia, have you heard them talking about this? About the house?" She hesitated, chewing on her lip. "Yeah, I have. I wasn't going to say anything. I didn't want to upset you right after Grandpa." She took a breath. "But they're not just suggesting it. They're planning on it. I overheard them a few weeks ago, before Grandpa even passed. They were arguing in his office. Mom was worried it would look bad, moving so fast. Dad said the market wouldn't wait, and that sentimentality is expensive." The coldness spread through my chest again, but this time it was edged with ice. They had been planning this while my husband was still alive. "There's more," Mia said, her voice dropping lower. "They were talking about legal stuff. I heard them say power of attorney. Dad was complaining that it would be easier if he already had it. Mom said they needed to start laying the groundwork with Dr. Evans to document your age-related cognitive decline. Age-related cognitive decline. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent, to strip me of my rights, my autonomy, my own mind, so they could take everything without a fight. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it almost buckled my knees. This wasn't just about greed. This was about erasure. They wanted to nullify me as a person. "Grandma, are you there?" Mia's voice was sharp with worry. "I'm here," I managed to say, my throat tight. "I'm here." I had to anchor myself. The rage was the anchor. "Mia, think. Was there anything else? Any other names? Anything that sounded strange?" Mia's eyes unfocused for a moment as she thought back. "It was mostly about money, about the trust, but wait, yeah, there was something. They were arguing about Dad's new development project downtown. Mom was saying it was too risky, that he was over-leveraged, and he got really angry. He started yelling about how he had no choice, how he was being squeezed." "Squeezed by whom?" I pressed. "I don't know the specifics," Mia said, shaking her head. "But he mentioned a name. He spat it out, like it was poison in his mouth. He said this guy was back in town, buying up half of Austin, driving prices through the roof, and making it impossible for smaller players like him to compete." "What was the name, Mia?" I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "What was the name he said?" "It was weird," Mia recalled. "He sounded scared. I've never heard my dad sound scared before. He said, 'Thorne, Marcus Thorne is back.'" Marcus Thorne. The name didn't just ring a bell. It was a thunderclap from a distant, buried past. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. For a split second, the sewing room, the tablet, Mia's worried face, it all dissolved. I was standing in this very house, but 30 years younger. I could smell the rain on the hot pavement outside and the tension in the air, thick and bitter. Richard was shouting, his face flushed with anger, and there was a young man with him. A young man with dark, intense eyes and a face that was a mask of betrayal and fury. He was shouting back, something about theft, about his future being stolen. I couldn't remember the details. It was a memory I had long since packed away, locked in one of the dark, dusty attics of my mind, a scene I was meant to forget. Richard had insisted on it, but I never forgot the name. Marcus Thorne. "Grandma?" Mia's voice pulled me back to the present. "Who is Marcus Thorne? Do you know him?" A faint, dark memory, a whisper of a long-forgotten war, a name that made my slick, confident son sound terrified. It wasn't just a memory. It was a thread. And in a house full of enemies, a single thread was all I needed to start unraveling their perfect little plan. "I think," I said, a slow, cold smile touching my lips for the first time in days, "I might be about to find out." The fear was gone. The shock was gone. The grief was a distant echo. All that was left was the ice in my veins and a name that felt for the first time like a weapon. The phone call with Mia was a spark dropped on dry kindling. For the first time since Richard's funeral, the fog of quiet resignation began to burn away, leaving a sharp, clear anger in its place. Marcus Thorne. The name was a stone dropped into a deep well, the ripples spreading out, disturbing memories I had long left settled in the mud. I knew then that waiting was no longer an option. Passivity was a luxury I could not afford. The battle had been declared, and I had to find my weapons. My first move was to retreat from the modern world that David and Chloe inhabited so effortlessly. My laptop remained closed. My phone stayed on the kitchen counter, a silent black rectangle I refused to touch. Their world was one of pixels and data trails, a language I barely spoke and certainly didn't trust. My world, the one I had to rediscover, was built of paper and ink, of dust and memory. It was time to enter the ghost domain. Richard's home office. It wasn't an attic, not in the traditional sense, but it might as well have been. It was a room at the back of the house, beyond the guest bedroom, with a heavy oak door that was almost always closed. In 30 years of marriage, I could count on one hand the number of times I'd stepped inside. It was his space. "A man needs a fortress, Elizabeth," he'd say with a self-satisfied smile, as if he were a king ruling a vast empire from a 10 by 12 room with a window overlooking the neighbor's fence. He was never unkind about it, but the message was clear. This space was off limits. It was where he did his important work, where the foundations of our comfortable life were laid. Now it was a tomb, and I was about to become a grave robber. The key was still in the little ceramic dish on the hall table, right where he'd always left it. My hand was steady as I picked it up. The metal felt cold, foreign. I walked down the hall, the familiar plush runner muffling my footsteps. The house was silent, but in my head, it was screaming. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a stiff, grinding click, a sound of protest from a mechanism long unused. I pushed the door open. The air that rolled out was stale, thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and the faint, lingering smell of Richard's pipe tobacco. Dust motes danced like frantic spirits in the single shaft of sunlight cutting through a gap in the heavy velvet curtains. The room was just as I remembered it from my rare glimpses. Dark wood paneling on the walls, a heavy, imposing desk of mahogany that dominated the space. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed not with novels, but with leather-bound ledgers and rows of identical binders, and filing cabinets. 4 of them, military gray steel, standing like sentinels against the far wall. For a moment, I just stood there, on the threshold, feeling like an intruder in my own home. This room was a monument to a man I was beginning to realize I never truly knew. Every object felt like a piece of him, a piece that had been deliberately kept from me. The leather chair behind the desk still held the faint impression of his body. The set of silver pens on the blotter were arranged just so. It was a perfectly preserved diorama of a man's life, a life I had lived alongside, but never truly seen. I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking shut with a sound of finality. There was no turning back. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I was not here to mourn. I was here to hunt. I started with the filing cabinets. I pulled open the top drawer of the first one. The metal runners screeched, another sound of protest. The files were organized with meticulous, almost obsessive precision. Alphabetical, chronological, cross-referenced. Tax records, 1990, 1995. Property deeds, supplemental. Business correspondence, AC. Richard was nothing if not thorough. I pulled out a thick folder labeled Deeds. My hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, trembled slightly as I untied the small string holding it shut. Inside were the original documents for our house. I saw my own signature next to his, my handwriting a youthful, optimistic swirl compared to his sharp, aggressive script. We'd been so proud of this house. It was our fortress, our legacy. The word made my stomach clench. Legacy. The same word Chloe had used in her soulless Instagram posts. I put the file aside. It wasn't what I was looking for. I needed leverage, a forgotten asset, a hidden account, a secret that could give me power. I worked methodically, drawer by drawer, file by file. The sun crept across the sky, its light shifting through the dusty window. I ignored the growing ache in my back, the stiffness in my knees. I was fueled by something more potent than coffee, more sustaining than food. I was fueled by the cold fire of betrayal. I went through years of tax returns, my eyes scanning the dense columns of numbers for anomalies. Everything looked perfect, clean, too clean. I sifted through letters from lawyers, from accountants, from business partners I barely remembered, names and letterheads from companies that had long since gone bankrupt or been absorbed into larger entities. It was a paper trail of a life, a career, and it was telling me nothing. Hours passed. The room grew darker as the afternoon sun faded. I didn't turn on a light. The shadows felt appropriate, like they were my allies in this search. I felt a pang of despair. Maybe there was nothing here. Maybe David was right. Maybe I was just a foolish old woman tilting at windmills, living in a house full of meaningless paper. Then I saw it. In the bottom drawer of the last filing cabinet, pushed all the way to the back, was a simple cardboard storage box. It had no label. It looked out of place amongst the neatly categorized files. My breath caught. I knelt, my joints complaining loudly, and pulled the box out. It was heavy. The cardboard was soft with age, the corners starting to fray. A layer of dust coated the lid like a fine gray velvet. I wiped it away with the sleeve of my cardigan. I lifted the lid. The contents were not neatly filed. It was a jumble of old documents, curled at the edges, yellowed with time. They were from the early 90s, from the very beginning of David's career. Contracts, partnership agreements, memos. It was the genesis of his success. And at the bottom of it all, I found the photograph. It was a standard glossy photo, the colors now faded to a pale echo of what they once were, but the faces were clear. A young Richard, beaming with a predatory pride, his arms slung around my son. David stood beside him, looking impossibly young, a little overwhelmed, a nervous energy buzzing just beneath his polished surface. And on his other side, a third young man. He was tall, thin, with a wild mane of dark hair and an intensity in his eyes that burned right through the faded print. He wasn't smiling. His jaw was set, his expression a mixture of fierce ambition and a deep, simmering resentment. I didn't need a label. I knew. This was Marcus Thorne. My hand shook as I held the picture. This was it. The moment Richard's world and the stranger's world had collided, a ghost from a past I never knew existed. I turned the photograph over in my hands, as if the back might hold some explanation. It didn't. But what lay beneath it in the box did. It was a small ledger. Not like the large professional ones on the shelves. This one was personal. Bound in dark, worn leather, about the size of a paperback novel. It was held shut by a simple strap with a small, cheap-looking brass lock. A diary. A secret keeper. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This had to be it. I ran my thumb over the lock. It was flimsy, but it held. I sat back on my heels on the dusty floor, the ledger in one hand, the photograph in the other. The last of the daylight was failing, plunging the room into a deep twilight. For the first time, I felt a tremor of fear. Not of David or Chloe. Fear of what was in this book. Some truths, once known, can never be unknown. Did I really want to open it? Before I could decide, a chime echoed faintly from the kitchen. My laptop. I had forgotten it was even on. An email. I rarely got emails anymore. Aside from store promotions and newsletters I never read. I felt a sudden, cold dread. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was not a coupon for 20% off. Leaving the ledger and the photo on the floor, I pushed myself up. My legs were stiff, my back screamed in protest. I walked out of the office, leaving the door ajar, and went to the kitchen. The screen of the laptop glowed in the dim room. There, in my inbox, was a new message. The sender was a name I didn't recognize. Sterling Finch, Legal Group. The subject line was brutally direct. Notice of intent to file for conservatorship. My blood ran cold. I clicked it open. The language was sterile, formal, and more violent than any physical blow. On behalf of our client, Mr. David Miller. Petition the court. Establish a conservatorship over the person and estate of Mrs. Elizabeth Miller, citing concerns of age-related cognitive decline, recent instances of erratic behavior, demonstrated inability to manage her financial affairs, cognitive decline. The words hung in the air, clinical and cruel. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an attack. They were trying to have me declared mentally incompetent, to strip me of my home, my money, my autonomy, to turn me into a non-person, a ward of the sun who was trying to steal from me. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it stole the air from my lungs. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. The initial shock gave way to a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a cold, clean fire that burned away any lingering doubt, any thought of reconciliation. They hadn't just insulted me, they had given me my new purpose. This was no longer just about a house. This was about my life. My sanity, my right to exist. They had drawn a line in the sand, and I, Elizabeth Miller, was about to kick it back in their faces. I turned and walked back to the office, my steps no longer hesitant. I picked up the locked ledger from the floor. I no longer feared what was inside. I needed it. It was no longer a secret to be afraid of. It was a weapon. And I was going to learn how to use it. The weekend couldn't come soon enough. The legal notice sat like a viper in my inbox. I didn't delete it. I let it stay there, a reminder of the stakes, a whetstone on which to sharpen my resolve. When Mia's car pulled into the driveway on Saturday morning, I felt a surge of relief that was almost painful. She stormed into the house before I could even fully open the door, her face a thundercloud of protective fury. "I got your text. I can't believe him. I cannot believe him." She threw her backpack onto a kitchen chair. "Cognitive decline? Is he insane?" "He's the one who needs his head examined. And Chloe, I swear I saw her latest post, something about honoring family by making difficult choices." I wanted to throw my phone through a window. "I know, dear," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. My own rage had cooled over the past 2 days, hardening into something solid and heavy like steel. "Anger won't help us. We need a plan. We need a lawyer. We need to countersue for filial indecency." She fumed. I smiled, a thin, tight smile. "Maybe. But first, I found something." I led her back to the office. The room was exactly as I had left it, steeped in shadow and secrets. The box was still on the floor. I picked up the locked leather ledger and held it out to her. "Richards," I said simply. "I found it in a box with this." I handed her the photograph of the 3 men. Mia took them, her anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by curiosity. She studied the photo. "That's Dad. And Grandpa. Who's the other guy? He looks like he wants to murder someone." "That," I said, my voice low, "is Marcus Thorne." Mia's eyes widened. She looked from the photograph to the locked book in her other hand. "And this was with it. What's inside?" "I don't know. It's locked." She examined the small brass lock. "Did you look for a key?" "I've spent the last 30 years not looking for a key to anything in this room, Mia. I'm not about to start now." Mia looked at the lock, a thoughtful frown on her face. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver stud earring. Then she bent down and picked up a paperclip from a dusty tray on the desk. She straightened it out with nimble fingers. I watched, fascinated. I had been prepared for a complex process, a trip to a locksmith, perhaps, a professional to crack the code of my husband's past. Mia simply sat in Richard's imposing leather chair, placed the ledger in her lap, and went to work. She inserted the tip of the paperclip into the keyhole, using the post of her earring to apply a tiny amount of torque. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. The house was silent except for the faint metallic scratching sound. It felt like a desecration, a young woman with a paperclip picking the lock on a dead man's soul. It felt perfect. Less than a minute later, there was a soft, satisfying click. The strap fell open. Mia looked up at me, a triumphant, almost feral grin on her face. "Old locks are a joke," she said. "No firewalls." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We looked at each other for a long moment. This was it. The point of no return. I nodded. "Open it." Mia placed the ledger on the polished surface of the desk, the worn leather a stark contrast to the gleaming mahogany. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakably Richard's, neat, controlled, slanting slightly to the right. But this wasn't the script of business letters. This was different, more personal, more raw. The first entry was dated April 12, 1993. Mia began to read aloud, her voice soft at first, then growing tense with disbelief. April 12, 1993. David brought his new partner home for dinner. Marcus Thorne. The boy is brilliant, I'll grant him that. A fire in his eyes, but it's an undisciplined fire. He comes from nothing. You can see it in the way he holds his fork, the way his eyes dart around the room, sizing everything up. He has the hunger of a stray dog, a dangerous, low-class influence on my son. David sees a genius. I see a threat to our name. I sank into the visitor's chair opposite the desk, my legs suddenly weak. Low-class influence. The venom in the words was so potent, so purely Richard. The snobbery, the judgment. It was a side of him I had always known existed, but had chosen to ignore, to smooth over. Mia swallowed hard and continued to the next entry, a week later. April 20th, 1993. I reviewed their business plan. The software concept is revolutionary. It will make them both millionaires before they're 30. Thorne is the architect. David is the salesman. A dangerous combination. Power must be consolidated, not shared, especially not with someone of Thorne's breeding. David is soft. He believes in things like loyalty, partnership. These are weaknesses. They must be burned out of him if he is to survive, if he is to be my son. My God, Mia whispered, looking up at me, her eyes wide with horror. Grandpa. Keep reading, I said, my voice a dry rasp. She turned the page. The entries were sporadic, but they painted a horrifyingly clear picture. Richard had begun meeting secretly with a man named Arthur Vance, a senior programmer working with David and Marcus. May 14th, 1993. Vance is nervous, but greedy. He sees the world as I do, a series of transactions. For the price of his child's college tuition and a new car, he will provide me with the core source code and documentation. He believes he is selling information. He does not understand he is forging a sword. My hands were clenched into fists in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. I could see it all. The clandestine meetings, the secret handoffs, the cold, calculated betrayal, orchestrated not by a rival, but by my own husband, against our own son's partner. The final, devastating entries came in June. June 5th, 1993. I have the code. I have presented it to David as the work of an independent consultant I hired to help him. He was hesitant at first. The guilt was plain on his face. This is the test. The final crucible. Will he succumb to weakness, or will he seize the power I am offering him? I told him Thorne would do the same to him in a heartbeat. I told him this is how empires are built, on the bones of the weak. June 22nd, 1993. He did it. He filed the patent under his name alone. Thorne is ruined. I saw David last night. The guilt is still there, deep in his eyes, but it is being overshadowed by something else. The thrill of the win, the taste of absolute victory. He is learning. He stormed and raged about Thorne, called him a traitor for accusing him of theft. The performance was excellent. The boy will be a man yet. A ruthless man. A Miller. The room was utterly silent. Mia closed the book gently, as if it were radioactive. The truth lay between us, ugly and undeniable. My marriage, my son's entire career, the house, the money, the life we had built. It was all a lie. A monument built on a foundation of theft and deceit, with my husband as the master architect. Richard hadn't supported his son. He had corrupted him. He had taken David's youthful decency and deliberately, methodically poisoned it. The feeling that washed over me wasn't grief. The man I had mourned was a fiction. The man in this ledger was a monster. What I felt was a profound, sickening disgust. It coated the back of my throat like bile, and beneath the disgust, the cold, hard steel of my resolve settled into its final form. My fight was no longer about a house. It was bigger than that. It was about correcting a generational crime. It was about the ghost of Marcus Thorne, the brilliant boy whose future was stolen. It was about the ghost of my son, the decent young man who had been murdered and replaced by this hollow, greedy stranger. Richard had written that he wanted to forge David into a ruthless man. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. And now, I was going to unforge him. I looked at Mia. Her face was pale. her expression a mixture of revulsion and a familiar fiery anger. She was her father's daughter, but she was also mine. She had the Miller fire, but she had my conscience. He called him a low-class influence, Mia said, her voice shaking with rage. He destroyed a man's life because he didn't like the way he held his fork. He destroyed 2 men's lives, Mia, I corrected her, my voice low and even. He just didn't realize it at the time. I stood up and walked over to the desk. I placed my hand on the leather ledger. It felt warm now, as if it had absorbed our fury. David and Chloe want a legacy, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. They are about to get one, but it won't be the one they're expecting. Mia's eyes met mine, and the disgust in them was slowly being replaced by a focused intensity, the same intensity I'd seen in the photograph of Marcus Thorne. She was no longer just a supportive granddaughter. She was a co-conspirator. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your grandfather thought Marcus Thorne was a threat," I said. "I think he's the answer. Find him, Mia." Mia nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. The anger hadn't vanished. It had been channeled. She pulled my old laptop towards her, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and confidence that was mesmerizing. This was her world. She was the ghost in this machine. "Finding a reclusive billionaire isn't like finding an old roommate on Facebook," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "He's probably got layers of shell cores, privacy shields, digital moats around him." I watched as she worked. Her face was illuminated by the bluish glow of the screen. She didn't just type in a name and hit search. She moved through digital back alleys, pulling up corporate registration databases, cross-referencing board members of obscure holding companies, navigating the tangled webs of private equity firms. She murmured names of companies I'd never heard of. Oakhaven Capital, linked to Blackwood Ventures. And that's the feeder fund for Thorne's primary philanthropic trust. It was a language I didn't understand, but I understood the purpose. She was mapping the invisible empire that Marcus Thorne had built from the ashes of what Richard had burned down. It was a testament to the man's resilience. My husband had tried to destroy him, and he had come back a king. "He has no public-facing contact info, no social media, obviously," Mia said, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Everything is routed through his family office in Geneva. Trying to get through that front door is impossible. It's a digital fortress." My hope began to flicker. "So we can't reach him?" "I didn't say that," Mia said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "The fortress has a gatekeeper." She typed furiously for another minute, her screen flashing with lines of text and corporate diagrams. "Every fortress has a chief of staff. Someone who manages the flow of information. The human firewall." Her typing stopped. She leaned back in the chair, her expression triumphant. "Got her." She pointed to a name on the screen. Eleanor Vance, Chief of Staff, Thorne Industries, and I've got a private email address for her, not the public one on the website. This one is on a private server, linked to her personal domain. Vance. The name echoed in the silent room. Arthur Vance, the man from the ledger, the programmer Richard had bribed. I looked at Mia, my blood running cold for the second time in 3 days. Eleanor Vance. Could she be? Mia's eyes widened as she made the same connection. "Hold on." Her fingers flew again. A few clicks later, she was staring at an old, archived news article. Arthur Vance, deceased, car accident in 2008, survived by one daughter, Eleanor. We looked at each other. It wasn't just a key. It was fate. It was a thread from the past, dangling right in front of us, waiting to be pulled. The daughter of the man who helped Richard commit the crime was now the gatekeeper to the man who was the victim of it. "He keeps her close," I whispered, the beautiful, terrible irony of it settling over me. "He must know." "Or it's the world's sickest coincidence," Mia said. "Either way, this is how we get in." She highlighted the email address on the screen. It glowed like a beacon in the dark, dusty office, a digital key to the past, a weapon for the future. And I knew exactly what I was going to write. Mia had done her part. She had found him. She had breached the digital fortress of a man who wanted to be a ghost, and given me a way in, an email address, secure, encrypted, a direct line to Marcus Thorne. But I couldn't use it. An email is too easy to delete, too simple to ignore. It lacks weight. It lacks gravity. It feels bloodless. No, this required something different. This required a ghost of my own. So I found myself back in Richard's office, the room I had avoided for months, the air still thick with the scent of his cigars and old paper. The silence in here was different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, weighted with the years of decisions made at this very desk. Secrets kept, ambitions forged. I ran my hand over the dark mahogany, the wood cool and solid beneath my palm. This was Richard's throne, and from this throne, he had orchestrated the ruin of one man to build up another. My target wasn't the desk, but the stationery cabinet beside it. I opened the small, creaking door, and there it was, a box of his personal letter-writing paper, thick, cream-colored cardstock, with his name, Richard Miller, embossed in a simple, elegant font at the top. He'd used it for things he considered important: condolences, congratulations to the sons of his business partners, letters of recommendation that carried the weight of his reputation. It felt like a violation to touch it. Good. Let the dead be violated. They can't feel a thing. I took out a single sheet. It felt heavier than it should. I sat in his chair. The leather sighed under my weight, a familiar, unwelcome sound. For a moment, I felt a wave of dizziness, the sheer audacity of what I was about to do washing over me. I was a 75-year-old woman, a widow, a mother. I was supposed to be tending roses and looking at photo albums. Instead, I was plotting. I was preparing to make contact with a man my husband and son had destroyed, a man who had every reason to hate our family with every fiber of his being. I was about to invite a shark into the water, hoping it would eat my son and not me. My hand was steady as I picked up Richard's old fountain pen. The ink was dry, of course. I found a new cartridge in the desk drawer, my fingers moving with a mechanical precision that surprised me. I screwed the pen back together, the small click echoing in the silent room. I would not write a long, pleading letter. I would not explain or apologize. Apologies were worthless. They were air. Marcus Thorne didn't deal in air. He dealt in assets and liabilities, vengeance and victory. I had to speak his language. I took the high-quality scan of the photograph Mia had made for me, the one of Richard, a cocky young David, and a tense, hungry-looking Marcus Thorne, the ghost at the feast. I folded it carefully and set it aside. Then I began to write. The nib of the pen scratched against the thick paper, a sound like a secret being whispered. My first draft was too long, too emotional. I'd started to explain how I found the ledger, how sorry I was. I stopped, crumpled the paper, and tossed it into the wastebasket. Weakness. He would smell it a mile away. The second draft was too cold, too much like a business transaction. It lacked the hook. It didn't have the personal sting that would guarantee he couldn't ignore it. I crumpled that one too. I closed my eyes. I pictured Marcus Thorne. Not the young man in the photo, but the billionaire recluse he had become. A man who had clawed his way back from ruin, who had built an empire on the ashes of what was stolen from him. What would get his attention? Not money. He had more than he could ever spend. Not a threat. He would crush it without a thought. It had to be a mystery, and it had to be personal. It had to be about the one thing he could never get back: justice for the past. I took a fresh sheet of paper. My hand did not shake. The words came, simple and direct, surgical. Mr. Thorne, I wrote, I possess a ledger belonging to my late husband, Richard Miller. It details in his own hand the true nature of the dissolution of your business partnership with my son, David. It is a confession of a kind. I paused, reading the words over. Good. It was factual, intriguing. Now for the hook. I have no interest in its contents, beyond the fact that they are a historical record, a debt that was never paid. As such, I believe you are its rightful owner. Rightful owner. The words were a beautiful, perfect lie. The ledger was my weapon, not his. But framing it this way made it an offering, a piece of a puzzle he'd been missing for 30 years. It suggested I was a neutral party, a simple executor of a long-delayed transaction. I signed it simply, Elizabeth Miller. No sincerely, no regards, just my name. A statement of fact. I folded the letter, slipped it and the scanned photograph into a matching cream-colored envelope. I addressed it to his corporate headquarters in downtown Austin, not to a specific department, not to an assistant, just his name, Marcus Thorne. Let his people figure it out. Let the mystery of a handwritten letter on expensive stationery from a ghost of his past work its way up the chain of command. I didn't use the regular mail. I called a bonded courier service, the kind used for legal documents and sensitive materials. The young man who arrived was polite, professional. He placed my envelope into a secure pouch. "It will be there within the hour, ma'am," he said, handing me the receipt. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart finally hammering against my ribs. The die was cast. I had sent the invitation. Now, all I could do was wait and see if the devil would RSVP. The days that followed were a special kind of torment. Every time the phone rang, my stomach clenched. Every car that slowed on the street outside my window sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. David and Chloe were mercifully silent, probably busy with their lawyers, drawing up the paperwork to have me declared incompetent. Let them. Their war was being fought on a battlefield they understood. Mine was being fought in the shadows, with weapons they didn't even know existed. I spent the time preparing. I read and reread Richard's ledger. I memorized key phrases, dates, figures. His neat, sloping handwriting became as familiar to me as my own. "Marcus has a brilliant mind, but no killer instinct," one entry read. "He trusts too easily. David needs to learn that trust is a liability in this world. This will be his first, most important lesson." Richard hadn't seen it as a betrayal. He'd seen it as an education. He was teaching his son to be a predator by feeding him his first kill. The cold, sociopathic pragmatism of it still chilled me to the bone. This was the man I had shared a bed with for 50 years. After a week, I had almost given up hope. Maybe he'd thrown the letter away. Maybe his lawyers had intercepted it and advised him to ignore the ramblings of a grieving widow. Maybe he just didn't care anymore. Maybe the grudge had faded with time and success. I was sitting in the living room, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun, when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. No caller ID. My breath caught in my throat. I let it buzz a second time, then a third, schooling my features, forcing my voice to be calm. I answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was quiet, measured, and held an unmistakable charge of power. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed. "Mrs. Miller?" "This is she. My name is Marcus Thorne. I received your letter." There was no preamble, no small talk, just a direct statement. I felt a surge of triumph, hot and sharp. He'd taken the bait. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice even. "Thank you for calling. Your letter was intriguing. You propose that you have something that belongs to me." "I believe I do," I said. There was a pause. I could hear the faint hum of a car engine on his end. He wasn't in an office. "I don't typically engage in matters of history, Mrs. Miller. The past is the past." "Some parts of the past leave accounts outstanding," I countered, the phrase from the ledger coming to my lips. "This is a matter of settling a 30-year-old debt." Another silence, longer this time. I could almost feel him analyzing my words, my tone, searching for weakness, for an angle. "Zilker Park," he said finally. "The bench by the old oak tree near Barton Springs. 1 hour." And then he hung up. "No. Is that convenient for you?" "No. I look forward to seeing you." It was a summons, a command. I looked at the clock. I had 45 minutes. I didn't change into anything fancy. I wore a simple pair of gray slacks and a comfortable blue blouse. I wanted to look like what I was. A grandmother. Unassuming. Harmless. It was the perfect camouflage. I drove myself to the park, my old Buick gliding through the Austin traffic. The whole way, I rehearsed my lines. Not just what I would say, but how I would say it. I would not plead. I would not be emotional. I would be a businesswoman closing a deal, the most important deal of my life. Zilker Park was alive with the sounds of a late spring afternoon. Children laughing, dogs barking, the distant thrum of the city. I found the bench easily. It sat under the sprawling branches of a massive, ancient oak tree, offering a measure of seclusion. I sat down, placing my handbag beside me. Inside it, nestled in a protective sleeve, was Richard's leather-bound ledger. It felt like a live thing, humming with dormant energy. I didn't have to wait long. Exactly on the hour, I saw him approaching. He wasn't what I expected. The old photographs showed a young man crackling with nervous energy. The media portrayed him as a ruthless, phantom-like figure. The man walking towards me was in his early 50s, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored gray suit, no tie. He was fit, with silvering temples and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace, a man completely at ease with the power he wielded. He didn't have bodyguards. He didn't need them. His presence was its own security detail. He stopped a few feet from the bench, his eyes locking onto mine. They were a startlingly pale blue, and they missed nothing. He was assessing me, taking my measure. "Mrs. Miller," he said. His voice was the same as on the phone. Calm, controlled, with an undertone of steel. "Mr. Thorne," I replied, inclining my head slightly. I didn't stand up. I would not cede the ground. This bench was my territory. He sat on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectable distance between us. He didn't look at me. He looked out at the park, at the people enjoying their lives, oblivious to the ghosts of the past convening right beside them. "You took a significant risk, contacting me," he said, his tone conversational. "The greater risk was in doing nothing," I said. He turned his head slowly, his pale blue eyes fixing on me again. "Show me." No more games, no more pleasantries. It was time. I reached into my handbag, my movements deliberate. I pulled out the ledger. The afternoon sun glinted off the worn, dark leather. I didn't hand it to him. I placed it on the space on the bench between us, a neutral ground. He looked at the ledger, then back at me. My lawyers would have a field day with this. Forgery, extortion, harassment of a grieving family. "Your lawyers would first have to prove it's a forgery," I said calmly, "and it isn't. You and I both know the story it tells is true. As for extortion, I haven't asked you for anything. I am offering you something. A piece of your own history. You can take it or leave it." A flicker of something. Surprise? Respect? Crossed his features before being instantly suppressed. He reached out and picked up the ledger. He didn't open it right away. He ran a hand over the cover, his fingertips tracing the embossed pattern. I wondered what he was thinking, what memories this object was dredging up. The memory of betrayal? The sting of youthful humiliation? Then he opened it. He didn't start at the beginning. His eyes scanned the pages, looking for names. His own. David's. Richard's. His face was a perfect, impenetrable mask. He was a master at this. Decades of high-stakes negotiations had taught him to show nothing. I sat in silence, letting Richard's words do the work for me. I watched his eyes move, back and forth, absorbing the neat, damning script. I saw his jaw tighten, just a fraction, a small muscle twitching near his temple. That was the only sign. He was reading the entry about his lack of a killer instinct. He was reading Richard's cold justification for ruining him. He turned a page, then another. His breathing was steady, his posture relaxed, but I could feel the rage coming off him in waves. It was a cold, quiet rage, the kind that freezes rather than burns. He finally closed the book with a soft snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet air. He placed it back on the bench between us. He still didn't look at me. He stared at a family having a picnic 100 yards away. "Richard was a sentimental old fool," Marcus said, his voice dangerously soft. "Keeping a diary. It's the kind of mistake you make when you believe you'll never have to answer for anything." He finally turned to me, and for the first time, the mask slipped. His eyes were like ice chips. "What do you want, Elizabeth?" He used my first name. The game had changed. This was the moment. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my voice came out clear and steady. I had rehearsed this. I was ready. "My son David and his wife Chloe are trying to force me out of my home," I began, laying out the facts like exhibits in a courtroom. "They have had it appraised. They have retained lawyers to file for conservatorship, citing my age and supposed cognitive decline. They want to sell the house, liquidate the asset, and put me in a facility." Marcus listened without interruption, his gaze unwavering. He was absorbing the information, processing it. "The house, the one Richard and I built, the one David grew up in, has been listed for sale. The asking price is $2.2 million. I paused, letting the number hang in the air. "I will sell it to you, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing him in. "And only to you, for $1 million. His eyebrows rose, a millimeter. It was the first sign of genuine surprise he had shown. He had expected me to ask for a payoff, for a check to make me go away. He hadn't expected this. "That's a very generous discount, Elizabeth," he said, a hint of dark amusement in his tone. "Why?" "Because it's not about the money," I said. "The money is just a tool. The $1 million is more than enough for me to disappear and live comfortably. The rest of the market value, consider it a down payment on an old debt. Your debt." He was silent, calculating. I saw the wheels turning behind those cold, brilliant eyes. He was seeing the shape of my plan, but not all the pieces, not yet. "I have conditions," I added. "Of course you do," he murmured. 1. The deal must be all cash. No financing, no banks, no lengthy escrow. A simple, clean transfer. "Done," he said without hesitation. 2. The sale must be entirely private. No public listings, no agents, no announcements until after the papers are signed. "We use a private title company of my choosing." "Acceptable," he said. "What else?" I took a breath. This was the most important part, the linchpin of the entire scheme. "My third and only other condition," I said, looking him directly in the eye, "is that you attend the closing, personally. You and no one else. No lawyers, no assistants, no representatives. You must be there, in my house, to sign the final papers on a date and at a time of my choosing." He leaned back slightly, studying my face. He was looking for the trap. He knew there was one. A man like him always assumed there was a trap. "Why?" he asked, his voice a low purr. "Why my personal attendance?" "Because, Mr. Thorne," I said, allowing myself a small, tight smile, "I believe in the importance of symbolism. The man who was thrown out the back door 30 years ago should be the one to walk in the front door to collect what is his. It's about closing the circle." It was a good lie. Poetic. It appealed to the part of him that craved narrative justice, the part that had fueled his 30-year grudge. It was a reason he could understand, a reason that resonated with his own sense of drama and retribution. He looked down at the ledger, then back up at me. A slow, chilling smile spread across his lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just been handed a map to its prey's burrow. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated, and long-awaited vengeance. "Mrs. Miller," he said, the name formal again, a sign of respect for the game we were now playing. "You have a deal." He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He picked up the ledger from the bench. It was his now. He gave me a slight nod, a gesture of acknowledgement between two generals on the eve of battle. "My office will be in touch to arrange the transfer of funds to an account of your choosing," he said. And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the dappled afternoon light as quietly as he had arrived. I stayed on the bench for a long time, my hands trembling now that it was over. The air felt colder. The sounds of the park seemed distant and muffled. I had done it. I had made a deal with the devil, and my only prayer was that when the fires came, they would only consume the people I had marked for burning. The phone call to David and Chloe was one of the most difficult and satisfying performances of my life. I waited 2 days after my meeting with Marcus, letting the silence stretch, letting their own plans and legal machinations mature. I let them think they were winning. Then, on a Tuesday evening, I dialed David's number. Chloe answered, of course. Her voice was bright, artificial, the voice of someone performing for an unseen audience. "Elizabeth, hi, how are you feeling?" The false concern was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I'm tired, Chloe," I said, pitching my voice to sound frail, defeated. I let a little tremble enter my words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "Oh?" I could hear the eagerness in her voice, the sound of a vulture scenting a kill. "Thinking about what?" David must have taken the phone from her, because his voice came on the line next, smoother, but just as predatory. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "David," I sighed. I think you're right. This house, it's too much for me. The memories, it's a burden." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. It was Chloe. I could picture her, clutching David's arm, her eyes wide with victory. "Mom, we know this is hard," David said, his voice dripping with condescending sympathy. "But we really think it's for the best. For your future. Your security. I know, dear. I know you do." I paused, as if gathering my strength. Something's happened. Something unexpected. "What is it?" David asked, a new edge of alarm in his voice, fear that his prize was slipping away. "I received an offer on the house," I said quietly, a beat of silence. "An offer? How? It's only just been listed. The sign only went up yesterday." "I know. It wasn't through the agent. It was private." This was the tricky part, the part where the lie had to be perfect. "It's from a private investment trust. From Switzerland. They wish to remain anonymous." "A Swiss trust?" David's voice was sharp with suspicion and greed. "Who are they? How did they find you?" "They said they follow legacy properties, houses with history. Their representative contacted me directly. He said they don't like dealing with agents." I let my voice trail off, as if I were confused by the complexities of high finance. "They made an offer, David. An all-cash offer." "How much?" he blurted out, the pretense of concern gone, replaced by raw avarice. I paused for dramatic effect. It's unbelievable, really. It's well above your asking price. They said they value the property's unique history and my stewardship of it." I injected a note of wonder into my voice. They were so respectful. The silence on the other end was electric. I could feel their minds racing, the dollar signs lighting up in their eyes. An anonymous Swiss trust. It was the perfect bait. It sounded exclusive, powerful, and most importantly, untraceable. It explained away the speed and the lack of a bidding war. It was a rich eccentric's whim, a golden ticket falling right into their laps. "Above asking?" Chloe's voice squeaked. "How much above asking?" I don't think I should say over the phone," I said, feigning caution, "but it's significant. They want to close quickly and quietly." "Of course they do," David said, his voice now thick with excitement. "Mom, this is incredible. This is the best possible outcome. See?" "We told you this was the right move." "I suppose so," I said, my voice small. "It's all happening so fast." "Don't you worry about a thing," David said, now fully in control, the triumphant son managing his confused elderly mother. "You did the right thing by telling us. We'll handle the lawyers, the paperwork. You just tell these Swiss people that your family will facilitate the closing." "They have their own people," I said quickly. "It was one of their conditions. They use a specific title company. They want everything handled with utmost discretion." Fine, whatever they want," David said dismissively. "The important thing is, the deal is done. We did it, Chloe." I could hear him laughing in the background, a sound of pure, unadulterated greed. Then Chloe got back on the phone, her voice a whirlwind of energy. "Elizabeth, this is amazing. It's a sign. The universe is telling us we're on the right path. This isn't just an ending, it's a celebration. We have to give the house a proper send-off." "A send-off?" I asked, playing dumb. "A party. Not just any party. A farewell to the Legacy Estate party. It will be epic. We'll get caterers, a DJ. Oh, and I'll live stream the whole thing. All my followers have been so invested in our family's journey. They've been asking about the house. This will be the perfect climax to the story. We can even sign the final papers during the live stream, the emotional final moments in our beloved family home, the symbolism. People will love it." My blood ran cold. It was more perfect than I could have ever planned. She was going to broadcast her own humiliation to the world. She was building the stage, hanging the lights, and sending out the invitations for her own execution. It was sickening, and it was beautiful. "Oh, I don't know, Chloe," I said, my voice wavering. "A party seems like a lot. I'm so tired." "Nonsense," she chirped. "You won't have to lift a finger. David and I will handle everything. Just think of it as a final, happy memory in the house before you start your wonderful new chapter at Willow Creek. Please, Elizabeth. It would mean the world to me. For the legacy. For the family. For her brand. For her follower count. That's what she meant." I let the silence hang for a long moment, as if I were wrestling with the decision, as if I were a frail old woman being pushed around by her energetic modern daughter-in-law. "All right, Chloe," I sighed, the sound of capitulation. "If it's that important to you, a party." The squeal of delight on the other end of the line was genuine. The joy of a narcissist who has just been handed the ultimate prop for her social media theater. They talked for a few more minutes, laying out their grand plans, their voices overlapping in their excitement. They were so busy celebrating their victory they never once stopped to question it. They never once thought to ask the name of the Swiss trust, or the title company, or the representative. Their greed was a blindfold, and they had put it on themselves. When I finally hung up the phone, I sat in the gathering twilight of my living room. The house was quiet around me. The stage was set. The actors all had their scripts, and the audience was about to assemble. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound and chilling calm. The calm of a storm that has gathered all its power and is waiting, patiently, for the precise moment to break. The air in my old home was thick with cheap champagne and the cloying scent of Chloe's favorite floral perfume. It was a suffocating combination, a smell I'd forever associate with the end of things. From my designated armchair in the corner, a piece of furniture they'd insisted I occupy like a museum exhibit titled Gracious Matriarch, I watched the spectacle unfold. The house wasn't just full, it was stuffed. Packed with Chloe's influencer friends, David's slick business associates who all wore the same expensive, soulless shoes, and a handful of neighbors who looked deeply confused about the occasion. It was a funeral party disguised as a victory lap. Chloe drifted through the crowd, a shark in shimmering silk. Her phone was held aloft, an extension of her own arm, its single unblinking eye broadcasting her performance to the world. She had mastered the art of the curated sob, the perfectly timed glance of heartfelt emotion. I can't even put it into words," she said, her voice catching for the benefit of her thousands of followers. She panned the camera across the room, a sweeping shot of the laughing, drinking guests. "To have all our loved ones here, celebrating this new chapter. It's all for Mom, really." The camera found me, and I offered a placid, neutral smile. It was the only mask I had left to wear. "We're so blessed," she continued, dabbing at a tear that wasn't there. "To be able to honor Dad's legacy," she gestured vaguely at the portrait of Richard above the fireplace, "and provide Mom with the security and peace she deserves in her golden years. It's what he would have wanted." The lie was so audacious, so beautifully constructed, it was almost impressive. David stood beside her, his arm draped possessively around her waist. He was beaming, a man who believed he had outsmarted the world. He caught my eye and gave me a little wink, a gesture meant to be conspiratorial, as if we were partners in this grand, benevolent act. I felt nothing. The space where my heart used to ache for him was now a cold, calm void, waiting to be filled. I'd spent weeks preparing for this. Weeks of clandestine phone calls with Mia, of quiet afternoons with a lawyer Marcus Thorne had recommended. A shark of a different breed altogether. Weeks of practicing the serene, slightly vacant expression. It was the role of a lifetime. The noise in the room was a dull roar, the meaningless chatter of people performing happiness. I focused on the grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from my parents. Its heavy pendulum swung back and forth, a steady, unyielding metronome, counting down the final minutes of their reign. 8:57. 8:58. David leaned down to whisper in Chloe's ear, and she nodded, her smile widening. They thought the notary was late. They were getting anxious. The final signature, the only thing standing between them and $2.2 million. At precisely 9 o'clock, as the clock began its deep, resonant chime, the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the party's din with the clean finality of a guillotine. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned towards the door. "Oh!" Chloe exclaimed, her face a perfect mask of delighted surprise for her audience. "That must be the notary with the final papers. Finally!" She shot a dazzling smile at her phone. "Wish us luck, everyone. This is it. The moment we secure Mom's future." She practically danced to the door, her movements exaggerated for the camera she still held. She was a conductor bringing her masterpiece to its grand crescendo. With a theatrical flourish, she pulled the heavy oak door open, ready to welcome a mild-mannered official with a briefcase. But it wasn't a meek notary standing on the porch. The man who stood there was an abyss in a bespoke suit. Marcus Thorne. He wasn't just tall, he seemed to consume the space around him, the warm light from the house barely touching the sharp lines of his face. Flanking him, just a step behind, was his lawyer, a woman whose severe expression made it clear she didn't bill by the hour for pleasantries. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Chloe's smile froze, then slowly collapsed, her influencer-trained features unable to process the raw, unscripted reality in front of her. Marcus didn't wait for an invitation. He strode past her into the foyer, his presence a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. He sucked all the air, all the cheap joy, out of the room. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic, tinny sound of confused comments pinging on Chloe's phone. He surveyed the stunned crowd, his eyes sweeping over the frozen faces, the half-raised glasses. He looked like a king inspecting an army he had already conquered. His gaze was cold, ancient, filled with a patience that was far more terrifying than any anger. He finally let a small, chilling smile touch his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. He turned his head slightly, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the silent room. It was the sound of iron striking stone. "Thank you all for attending my housewarming." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, letting them seep into the minds of the bewildered guests. "The bar is open. Please enjoy yourselves." Chloe's phone was still clutched in her hand, the screen a window into her personal hell. The live stream, which she had so carefully orchestrated, was now broadcasting the unfiltered, frozen horror on her face to the entire internet. Her mouth was open, a silent "oh" of disbelief. The torrent of comments on her screen had shifted from heart emojis and congratulations to a frantic cascade of question marks and stunned face emojis. "OMG, who is that? Is this part of the party? Chloe, are you okay?" The digital world was witnessing the precise moment her perfect narrative shattered into a million pieces. David was the first to break the spell. He pushed through a cluster of his petrified colleagues, his face a ghastly white sheet. The smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by a raw animal panic. "Thorne," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "What is this? What the hell are you doing here? This is a private party." Marcus didn't even grant him a glance. He was focused on the portrait of Richard hanging over the grand fireplace. He walked towards it slowly, deliberately, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the thick Persian rug. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. He stopped directly beneath the painting, tilting his head as if studying a curious artifact. The painted version of Richard looked down, eternally confident, a man of industry and legacy. Marcus saw something else entirely. "Your father," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet, but resonating with decades of cold fury. He was speaking to David, but his words were for the room, for the camera, for the world. Your father was a coward. A collective gasp went through the room. Someone dropped a glass, the sound of it shattering on the hardwood floor unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He subscribed to a broken philosophy, Marcus continued, his gaze still fixed on the portrait. He thought betrayal made a man strong. That theft was just another word for ambition. He believed that by crushing a better man, he could forge his son into a titan. He finally turned, his eyes locking onto David's. The contempt in them was a physical force. He was wrong. All he did was make you a thief, and your own boundless, pathetic greed that made you a fool. David was trembling, his hands clenched into useless fists at his sides. "Get out," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Get out of my mother's house." "Your mother's house?" Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of all humor. "This house was sold to me this afternoon. The deed was filed electronically at 4:57 p.m. This is my house now. Your mother, you see, is a far more astute business person than your father ever was. She understands the value of a debt finally coming due." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He didn't produce a weapon or a legal document to be served. He pulled out a single, crisp sheet of paper. It was a high-quality scan, notarized with a heavy embossed seal in the corner. He walked the final few feet to David and held it out. "He also kept a record," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the phone, lying on a nearby table where a panicked Chloe had dropped it, picked up with perfect clarity. A little leather ledger, a confession of sorts, a monument to his own treachery. And he wrote down exactly what he did. How he paid off my employee, stole my source code, and handed you my future on a silver platter. David stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. He wouldn't take it. "Read it," Marcus commanded. With a shaking hand, David took the page. Chloe's phone, now propped against a bowl of artisanal olives, had a perfect, steady shot. The camera captured everything. It captured the way David's eyes darted across the page, his face slackening with dawning comprehension. It captured the single, damning paragraph written in his own father's elegant, familiar script, detailing the sin that had built their family's fortune. It captured the moment the truth landed, not like a revelation, but like a physical blow. David's body seemed to crumble from the inside out. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat, a noise of pure, primal agony. He staggered backward, stumbling into a ridiculously expensive, minimalist floor lamp that Chloe had bragged about on her blog. It crashed to the floor, but David didn't seem to notice. His world had been reduced to the words on that page. The foundation of his life, the legacy he so proudly claimed, was a lie. He wasn't a self-made man. He wasn't even his father's son. He was just a common thief, and now the whole world knew it. The live chat on Instagram was no longer just confused. It was a digital firestorm. Screenshots were being taken. The clip was being screen recorded, duplicated, and shared. #Thorn Reckoning, #Legacy, of lies, #Chloe Collapse. The hashtags were already spawning, spreading across the internet like a virus. The perfect family facade wasn't just cracked. It was being publicly executed, atomized in a viral fire of shame and ridicule, broadcast live from the ruins of their own victory party. Chloe finally let out a wail and lunged for the phone, but it was too late. The damage was done. The truth was out. The bill had been paid. 6 months can feel like a lifetime, or it can feel like the first clean, lung-filling breath after you thought you were going to drown. For me, it was the latter. The silence I woke up to now wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of the house in Austin. It was a light, airy silence, filled with the distant, rhythmic shushing of waves against sand. The face on my tablet screen smiled, and for the first time in years, Mia's smile reached her eyes. "You look, I don't know, Graham, younger." I laughed, a real laugh that came from my belly. It's the California air. Or maybe it's the absence of bullshit. It's a wonderful exfoliant. I was sitting on the balcony of a bright, modern condominium overlooking the Pacific. No dark wood, no heavy drapes, no ghosts, just glass and steel and sunlight. my new home. The world Richard and I had built was gone, and I didn't miss it for a second. That world had been a cage, gilded and comfortable, but a cage nonetheless. This was freedom. "Have you heard anything?" I asked, my voice even. I wasn't asking out of concern, but out of a clinical, detached curiosity. It was like reading the end of a book I already knew I wouldn't like. Mia's expression sobered. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Dad's company is, well, it's gone. The investors pulled out the day after. That night, the story went everywhere. Forbes, the Wall Street Journal. Some tech blogs even dug up the original patent filings. They called him the trust fund thief. Nobody would do business with him. He tried to sue Marcus for defamation. "How did that go?" I asked, taking a sip of my tea. Marcus's legal team buried him in discovery motions and counterclaims within a week. Dad dropped the suit. Last I heard, he's selling off the commercial properties to cover his legal bills. They're getting divorced. It was a statement of fact, delivered without emotion. "And your mother?" Mia sighed, a puff of weary air. "Chloe, oh man. Her downfall was biblical. The internet is forever Graham. The memes alone were brutal. Chloe's catastrophic housewarming. They turned her teary-eyed, blessed speech into 1,000 jokes. Her sponsors dropped her so fast. She tried to rebrand as a victim, do a whole redemption arc on some daytime talk show, but no one was buying it. She lost everything. Her career, her husband, her legacy." We were quiet for a moment, the only sound the call of a gull somewhere over the water. I had watched it all unfold from a distance, a silent observer to the controlled demolition I had set in motion. I had sold the house to Marcus for $1 million, half of what it was worth, but more than enough. $500,000 I took for myself, to disappear, to start over. The other $500,000 I placed in a secure, untouchable trust for Mia. A real legacy. One built on truth, not theft. I felt no glee, no smug sense of triumph. I had expected to feel a surge of vindictive satisfaction, but it never came. In its place was only a profound, quiet finality, a stillness, the closing of a very, very long chapter. I looked out at the endless blue of the ocean, the horizon a clean, sharp line between the water and the sky. It was a view with no ghosts and no secrets. It was just a view, and it was mine. They had tried to write the end of my story. They wanted to put me in a box, both literally and figuratively, a gentle old woman fading into a comfortable, managed oblivion. They took my husband's memory and twisted it into a shield for their greed. They tried to take my home, the last piece of my life that I controlled. In the end, they didn't succeed in taking anything from me. They only managed to lose their own souls, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the wreckage. I didn't seek revenge. Not really. Revenge is a hot, messy, passionate thing. What I did was cold. It was calculated. It was business. I simply presented a bill that was 30 years overdue, a debt of honor, of truth, of a stolen life, and I made sure the whole world was there to watch it being paid.